Today we're continuing our look at Article 2 of the UCC by looking at performance and breach of sales contracts. Underlying all transactions in the UCC is this idea of good faith, that the parties are expected to act in good faith. They're expected to be honest and deal fairly with each other. So that underlies our performance requirements. So what are the seller's obligations in a sales contract? Well, the seller is supposed to comply with something called the perfect tender rule. It says that the seller should have perfectly conforming goods available at the agreed upon time for the buyer. But there are some exceptions to that. One exception is the seller's right to cure. The seller can repair, replace, or modify goods within a reasonable time so long as they give the buyer notice of the intent to cure and so long as the seller can still deliver the correct conforming goods during the contract period. Now, in some instances, even after the contract period has passed, we will allow the seller to cure if the seller had reasonable grounds to believe the buyer would accept non-conforming goods. For instance, if I ordered 1,000 blue ink pens, and I've done that every year for the last 3 years, and for the last 3 years you've sent me 1,000 red ink pens and I've accepted those instead, well, you would have reasonable grounds to believe that I would do that again. And so in that instance, you would have an opportunity to cure even after the contract period had expired. Another exception to the perfect tender rule is commercial impracticability, and that comes into play when unforeseen occurrences make performance commercially impossible. For instance, there's a hurricane and that prevents you from delivering the goods on time or prevents you from getting some material or something that you need to manufacture my goods. And so if there's a commercial impracticability like that, that can excuse performance under the perfect tender rule. So what are the buyer's obligations? Well, the buyer has to pay and accept conforming goods. The buyer does have a right of inspection, and he has to inspect within a reasonable period of time. Of course, you know, some defects may be latent. They may not be discoverable until later when the product is actually used. And so what is a reasonable time is going to depend in part on the nature of the defect and how easy it is to discover. The buyer has to accept those conforming goods, and his acceptance is going to be manifested in one of three ways: either expressed in word or deed, or if the buyer's behavior or words don't express it, it will be presumed within a reasonable time. It will also be presumed if the buyer acts inconsistently with the seller's ownership, for instance, by taking the goods and selling them to someone else. The buyer has to give the seller notice if he's going to reject the goods, and the buyer has to use reasonable care while holding or returning the goods. Okay, so he can't just leave them out in the rain, so to speak. He has to keep the goods safe and dry in a reasonable manner. What remedies are available if the parties breach? Ideally, our goal would be to put the parties in the position that they would have been in when the deal was completed. But what are the options? What are the seller's remedies if the buyer breaches? Well, if it's a breach prior to delivery, the seller can cancel the contract and withhold delivery of the goods. The seller could resell the goods to someone else and sue for any deficiency. If it's unfinished goods, like raw materials or things that were partly produced, they may be able to sell those for scrap and sue for any loss, or go ahead and finish the product and then sell it and sue for any loss. If it's something that the seller is unable to sell, maybe it's a unique good that nobody else wants, then the seller could go ahead and sue for the contract price as well as any related incidental damages. Throughout all this, the seller is again expected to act in good faith, and there is still that obligation to mitigate damages to try and minimize loss. If it's a breach after delivery, so the seller has delivered the goods but the buyer doesn't pay, the seller can sue for the contract price, or if the buyer has become insolvent, the seller can go in and reclaim the goods within 10 days. What are the buyer's remedies if the seller breaches? Well, if the seller refuses to deliver the goods, the buyer can cancel the contract. Or if it's a unique good, he may pursue specific performance requiring the seller to deliver the goods. The buyer could cancel the contract and cover. By cover, we mean obtain substitute goods from some other seller. But there again, the buyer would have to act in good faith and without unreasonable delay, because we can't let those damages pile up. And if he buys substitute goods, he could recover the difference between the cover price and the original contract price. It may be appropriate in some instances for the buyer to actually recover the goods. Maybe if he's already paid, he could bring an action to recover those goods and go get them from the seller. And always the buyer has the right to sue for any damages. What if the seller delivers non-conforming goods? Then the buyer can reject those goods and obtain cover. The buyer could potentially revoke goods that he's already accepted if it was a substantial nonconformity and the seller promised to cure but didn't, or the nonconformity was difficult to discover, or the seller made repeated assurances that the goods were in fact conforming when they really weren't. Moving on from performance and breach to the idea of warranties. And there are three types of warranties that we're going to look at: warranty of title, express warranties, and implied warranties. So the warranty of title arises automatically, and it assures the buyer that the seller has good title to sell the product, that there's no liens against the product, and that he has the right to sell it. Express warranties are warranties created by the seller's representations regarding the quality, condition, description, or performance of the goods, and it can arise from a promise or stated fact by the seller. It can arise from a product description or advertisement if they show you using the product in a particular way. It can arise from a display or sample that you see. All of those things can create express warranties. It can be created orally or in writing at or after the time of the sale. So if you're the seller, you've got to be careful what you say and how you represent the product so that you don't create any unintended express warranties. A statement of opinion and value does not create an express warranty. Okay, so saying, I think this is the greatest product in the world, that is an opinion. It does not create an express warranty, though there can be an exception there if the seller is in fact an expert and it would be reasonable for you to rely on that expert's statement. Our third type of warranty is the implied warranty, and there are two implied warranties that we'll talk about. These implied warranties are implied by law. They arise by law from the nature of the transaction. The first type of implied warranty is the implied warranty of merchantability. It arises automatically anytime there's a sale by a merchant, so we're treating merchants and non-merchants differently here. And it just guarantees that the goods are merchantable, that they're reasonably fit for their ordinary purpose. The second type of implied warranty is the implied warranty of fitness for a particular purpose. And it arises when any seller, merchant or not, knows the particular purpose the buyer will use the goods for and knows the buyer is relying on his or her skill and judgment to select suitable goods. However, this implied warranty of fitness for a particular purpose does not apply if the buyer and seller have equal knowledge, because in that situation you would not rely on the other party to select the suitable goods. So how do we disclaim these warranties or exclude these warranties? Because if you make a warranty and then breach it, there can be damages that could be awarded based on that. So sometimes we want to exclude these warranties. The warranty of title can only be disclaimed by specific language in the contract. The express warranty can be avoided if the seller just doesn't make any promises. It can also be avoided with specific written language at the time of the contract. The implied warranty of merchantability can be disclaimed by using the language as is or with all faults. So if you'll see this sometimes on car lots, especially used car lots. They're selling the car as is. That lets you know that, hey, they're not guaranteeing that this car is fit for its ordinary purpose. Fitness for a particular purpose warranty may also be disclaimed specifically and in writing. Alright, so that is a look at performance and breach of sales contracts.